This scary story is about my grandfather's childhood. Back then, he used to run around playing everywhere in the village with two older neighbor boys. Being older, the two friends often teased and mocked him, calling him a coward and chasing him home, saying he'd wet his pants from fear later. One time, the two older neighbor boys plotted to explore the abandoned house of the old village landlord. Their destination was the old mansion of a landlord who had fled long ago. Rumor had it that a concubine had died inside, so the villagers whispered that the place was haunted. After just a few years of neglect, the once grand house had become dilapidated and ruined, exuding a gloomy and eerie atmosphere. My grandfather followed the two older boys to the gate of the mansion. Frightened, he tried to dissuade them from entering, saying there were ghosts inside, but he didn't have the courage to go back alone. Hearing this, the two older boys laughed, their voices full of defiance. They said that if there weren't ghosts, they wouldn't even bother going in. The more forbidden it was, the more eager they were. With a dry creak, they pushed open the heavy wooden door, draped in cobwebs, and brazenly stepped inside. The scene inside was truly desolate. Weeds in the courtyard grew waist high, and walls were crumbling everywhere, giving off a spine-chilling gloom. Although the two older boys talked tough, once inside, they also began to tread carefully, fear clearly showing on their faces. My grandfather stood hesitating at the door, but wanting to fit in and play with them in the future, he steeled himself and summoned the courage to follow them inside. The two boys looked around the yard and saw nothing interesting besides weeds and trash, so they invited each other to head towards the main hall. As soon as they stepped into the house, a strange smell hit them. It was the scent of moldy, rotting wood mixed with something bizarre and pungent that couldn't be put into words. The valuable items in the house had been looted long ago, leaving only tattered, broken things scattered everywhere. After searching for a while and finding nothing, one boy spoke up to reassure them, saying there were no ghosts, just made-up stories to scare children. But before he could finish his sentence, the other boy suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream, as if he had just seen something incredibly terrifying. Startled by the scream, my grandfather rushed over to ask what had happened to make him panic so much. The boy pointed a trembling finger at a black object dangling from the wall, telling my grandfather and the other boy to look at it. Looking in the direction he pointed, they saw an object hanging on the wall that looked exactly like a human head. Its color was dark black like smoked meat, but strangely, the hair remained quite intact. The three children huddled together, discussing why the landlord would hang a dried human head in his house. They guessed it was just a fake head meant to prank people. The boy who had been frightened earlier felt embarrassed in front of his friends, so he pulled a box of matches from his pocket. He aggressively declared he would burn that damn thing to vent his anger. My grandfather tried to speak up to stop him, but the words of the youngest child carried no weight, and no one listened to him. True to his word, the boy struck a match and set fire directly to the thick hair of the dried human head. Very quickly, the fire caught the dry hair, sizzling and emitting a strong, acrid smell. Seeing the fire flare up violently, the two older children also began to panic, pushing each other as they scrambled to run out as fast as their legs could carry them. Seeing his friends run, my grandfather also panicked and ran after them into the courtyard. Because his legs were short, he ran last. In his confusion, he seemed to hear a miserable scream coming from the burning head, so he turned back to look. In that moment, my grandfather recounted that he seemed to see the human head glaring after them with eyes full of malicious hatred. When he got home, my grandfather was too scared to breathe a word to the adults. After dinner, he covered himself with a blanket and went to sleep early. The night passed in silence. Early the next morning, when my grandfather woke up, he was shocked to find his pillow covered in clumps of black hair. He reached up to touch his head and was horrified to realize that all the hair on his head had fallen out. Overnight, he had become completely bald. My grandfather screamed in terror, calling for his family. His shrill cry alerted his parents, who rushed into the room to see what was wrong. Seeing my grandfather's bald head, everyone in the house was startled and panicked, not understanding what had happened. My grandfather tearfully showed the handful of fallen hair to everyone, crying that his hair was still there when he went to sleep. So why had it all fallen out like this? His parents sensed something ominous and pressed him to see if he had messed with anything unclean. My grandfather dared not hide it anymore and had to tell the story. So his parents took him to the homes of the other two children. Upon arrival, they saw the two boys were exactly like my grandfather, bald overnight. The three families knew this was serious and went together to find the village chief. Everyone knew the village chief was very knowledgeable about matters of yin and yang. Seeing their children in trouble, they could only beg him to think of a way to save them. The village chief looked at the three bald heads and sternly asked the children to confess what disaster they had caused, because one doesn't get shaved by ghosts for no reason. My grandfather, being timid, was terrified when the village chief slammed the table and shouted. He sobbed and confessed everything about the two older boys setting fire to the human head in the abandoned house. Upon hearing this, the village chief's face changed dramatically. Without a word, he demanded my grandfather immediately lead the way to see the burnt, dead head. Curious villagers also followed, surrounding the village chief as they went to the old landlord's ruined house. The village chief stepped into the main hall, looked up at the altar where the charred black object lay, and his face instantly turned pale. He exclaimed in horror, not expecting such an evil artifact to appear here. Seeing the village chief's expression, the villagers knew this matter was not simple. To quickly clarify things, someone spoke up and asked the village chief what that strange black thing actually was. The village chief stared at the burnt human head, silent for a long time before uttering two words: Jai Gu, house curse. Hearing this, the villagers looked at each other in confusion, shaking their heads and saying it was the first time they had heard the name Zaigu and didn't know what it was. They clamored to ask the village chief what Jaigu was and if it had anything to do with the children losing their hair. The village chief sighed and explained that Jaigu was a type of vicious sorcery that wealthy families in the past used to guard their homes. They used dark magic to seal a corpse, trapping a human head in the house to command the spirit to protect their property. Hearing the evil origin of the object, my grandfather's mother was scared to tears and knelt down, begging the village chief to find a way to save the children. The village chief hesitated for a moment, then ordered everyone to retreat to the courtyard, leaving him alone in the house to try and negotiate with it. None of the villagers dared to disobey. They all obediently retreated outside and closed the door tight. Outside in the yard, everyone was restless, curious about what ritual the village chief was performing or what he was saying inside. A few bold men curiously pressed their ears to the window, trying to listen for any movement inside the house. Those standing further away anxiously whispered, asking if they heard anything. The eavesdroppers whispered back that they only heard the village chief murmuring incessantly, his tone sounding like he was discussing or negotiating something. While everyone was buzzing with discussion, the door creaked open, and the village chief stepped out with a weary look on his face. My grandfather's father rushed forward to meet him, asking urgently about the situation and if the village chief had found a solution. The village chief, with a grave expression, ordered my grandfather's father to find a few strong young men and bring tools to the dry well in the backyard to dig up the corpse. Burying it properly was the only hope to settle the matter. Hearing this, my grandfather's father didn't dare delay. He ran straight home to get hoes and shovels, then led a few strong men to the backyard of the landlord's house. Sure enough, hidden among the overgrown wild grass was the mouth of a dry well, looking incredibly dark and cold. My grandfather's father volunteered to tie a rope and climb down the well first. The bottom of the well had been dry for a long time, filled only with muddy slime and weeds. Following the village chief's instructions, he and the others began to dig vigorously into the soil at the bottom of the well. After digging down more than half a meter, the shovel blade hit something hard. Sure enough, they had struck something. He shouted up to inform the village chief that they had dug up a very large earthenware jar. Hearing this, the village chief breathed a sigh of relief and directed the villagers to lower a rope to pull the jar up. My grandfather's father carefully tied the large jar securely at the bottom of the well and signaled for the people above to start pulling together. When the large jar was hauled up from the well, the curious villagers gathered around to look. Who knows how many years that water jar had been buried under the well? The mouth of the jar was sealed tight with a wooden lid, covered in squiggly talisman markings drawn in red ink. The village chief ordered everyone to pry the lid off. My grandfather's father took action himself again, using force to pry open the wooden lid covering the jar's mouth. As soon as it was opened, everyone around had to cover their noses and cry out as a pungent stench wafted up, making everyone nauseous. The bravest ones peeked inside and saw that the jar was filled with a murky liquid in which soaked a headless human corpse. Afterwards, the village chief ordered men to find a coffin, carefully placed the headless corpse from the jar and the burnt skull from the house together, and dig a large grave to bury them properly. He also thoughtfully erected a tombstone for the deceased. The strange thing was that after the headless corpse was properly buried, my grandfather's bald head suddenly began to sprout new, jet black hair. The two older boys who were with my grandfather also gradually grew their hair back, perhaps because they had survived that memorable ordeal together. From then on, wherever they went to play, they invited my grandfather along and never left him behind like before. The girl poured the sleeping pills into her cold palm, her vacant gaze fixed deep into the void, wondering if anyone could fathom the haunting obsession of dreams. A gulp of cold water slid down her throat but failed to extinguish the trembling within, for she had been imprisoned in a persistent nightmare for many long years. She dropped onto the bed, letting the room sink into silent darkness, surrendering herself to a sleep she could no longer even remember when it had first turned horrific. Her eyes were tightly closed, yet her mind wavered incessantly. To her, Sleep was no longer rest, but a form of brutal psychological torture. Cold sweat broke out profusely, her teeth clenched in invisible pain, because deep in her subconscious, she knew she was about to face that dark entity once again. In her delirium, she saw herself running for her life through a gloomy forest, her lungs wheezing as they tore through the silent air, playing the role of the hunted in a game of life and death. Her bare feet trampled over sharp grass, but the fear of something chasing closely behind made her dare not stop for even a single second. It was a grotesque creature with tangled stitches across its body, bloodshot eyes, and a mouth sewn shut with wire. A true monster emerged from hell. She lunged behind a bush to hide, her heart pounding as if it wanted to break out of her chest, facing a scene that was both eerily familiar and terrifyingly alien. Her trembling hand covered her mouth to prevent a scream of fear from escaping. Whenever her strength failed, she had to find a hiding place in utter despair. A sack-shaped head loomed past in the thick fog, searching everywhere with terrifying patience, determined never to let its prey go. A bizarre smile seemed to emerge behind those cold stitches, and like a cruel fate, it always found her no matter where she hid. Its giant hand reached out, and a silent scream choked in her throat as the black shadow enveloped everything, craving to drag her down into the eternal abyss. She jolted awake, bolting upright in bed with chaotic breathing. Her fierce survival instinct had pulled her back to reality the moment death drew near in her dream. Sitting motionless in the enveloping darkness, the chill seeped deep into her flesh, and her sweat-soaked shirt made her feel as if she had truly just returned from the realm of the dead. The next morning, daylight still could not dispel the gloom. Her stepmother looked at her with indifferent eyes, offering perfunctory inquiries about last night's nightmare, a reminder of the void left by her biological mother who had long since departed. The family meal took place in a terrifying silence. She only gave superficial answers to get it over with, for she knew that women would never understand the horror gnawing at her soul. Her father spoke up to break the stifling atmosphere, announcing that her grandmother in the countryside was seriously ill and wanted her to visit, a request that weighed heavily on her heart. Sitting on the bus back to her old hometown, watching her faded reflection through the glass window, she recalled the years of resentment, believing that her grandmother's neglect was what had caused her mother to leave her. She stepped off the bus, dragging her suitcase alone through the desolate landscape. Throughout the journey, her mind was filled only with dark thoughts and painful memories she wished to bury. Her grandmother's low-roofed old house appeared before her, mossy and dilapidated, as if forgotten by time, evoking an indescribable heartache. Her grandmother lay in bed, old and frail like a lamp in the wind. But instead of blaming her long-absent grandchild, her clouded eyes only showed concern for the girl's haggard complexion. She tried to hide her fatigue, saying it was just insomnia. But her grandmother looked at her with eyes both gentle and profound, offering to listen to and decode that strange dream. Sitting beside her grandmother, she tremblingly recounted every detail of the hideous sack-headed monster that had been pursuing her in her sleep for so many years. Her grandmother fell silent for a moment, her gaze turning distant, then pointed toward the corner of the room, telling her to take out the old box in the cupboard. She opened the rotten wooden cupboard, a strong musty smell rising up. An old shoebox lay still inside, bringing a terrifyingly familiar sensation. Her grandmother urged her to open it, And in that moment, she realized this was the place where her childhood treasures, which she had deliberately forgotten, were kept. Her hands trembled as she opened the lid, feeling as though she were opening a door leading back to a past full of pain but also mystery. Her eyes froze, and her pupils contracted sharply as a violent rush of memories flooded back like a whirlwind, tearing through the fog that had long shrouded her mind. Inside were old toys, and most prominently, a crude rag doll made of sackcloth, the object that awakened all the shattered fragments of her childhood memories. She remembered the dark years after both her parents had left, when her grandmother was the only person who held her hand and protected her in the middle of a harsh life. Memories of self-pity while watching the neighborhood children play with beautiful dolls flooded back, while she could only watch and endure their cruel mockery. She remembered that rainy night when she cried and asked her grandmother if anyone loved her, and her grandmother had playfully scolded her, affirming her boundless love by the flickering oil lamp. Her grandmother's hands were rough and unskillful, but she had meticulously used every scrap of yarn, buttons, and old sackcloth to sew her a friend, a bodyguard to protect her sleep. Although that doll was ugly and grotesque in the eyes of others, to the little girl back then, it was her whole world, the only anchor she held tightly every night. She sobbed uncontrollably in the dark room, realizing she had been cruel enough to let those memories fade, and had forgotten even the presence of the silent protector. She had forgotten the most precious gift, and also unintentionally forgotten the vast love her grandmother had devoted entirely to her unfortunate grandchild. She rushed to embrace her grandmother, the years of resentment vanishing like dust, leaving only belated remorse and a tightening pain in her chest. She sobbed her apologies, but her grandmother only gave a gentle smile, her thin hands stroking her hair forgivingly, blurring all distances and mistakes. That night, the small house sank into a rare peace. The sack monster no longer appeared, for it had fulfilled its mission of guiding her back to the roots of love. Lying next to her grandmother, holding the old sack doll in her arms, she understood that although the scars of the past could not be erased, this warmth was enough to comfort her cold soul forever after. My name is Lee Nien, and what I am about to tell you is neither imagination nor fiction. It is what truly happened, an experience that haunted me throughout my school years and for a long time afterward. Most people have witnessed school bullying at some point, but few think about those like me. People who live every day in fear, resignation, and being trampled upon without mercy. My mother told me I was very mischievous as a child. Once, while playing, I accidentally spilled boiling water on my face, leaving a large burn scar that became a permanent mark on my countenance. That very scar caused me to be ostracized since childhood. Even in high school, I couldn't escape the scrutinizing glares and mocking whispers. Eventually, I became a recluse, living in deep isolation. Outwardly, I was quiet and reserved, but deep inside, I always yearned for friends, longing to be treated like a normal person until the day someone actively stepped into my world. That day, I suddenly heard someone call my name. I stopped, turned around, and saw Wang Chen. He was a new transfer student with a bright face and a friendly demeanor, which left me momentarily confused and surprised. For the first time, someone had taken the initiative to talk to me. I felt a mix of nervousness and fear, My heart raced as I tried to introduce myself clumsily, experiencing a whirlwind of emotions I had never felt before. Wang Chen didn't mock me at all. On the contrary, he laughed heartily and greeted me warmly, which made me feel a bit shy. Then, he looked at me seriously and expressed his wish to be my friend. This made me feel both surprised and valued. Since I was little, everyone had shunned and bullied me. Yet Wang Chen, a newcomer, wanted to be my friend. I hesitantly asked if he was afraid of the scar on my face. Hearing my question, Wang Chen burst into a smile, but it wasn't a mocking one. It was a rare, genuine kindness. He spoke sincerely, saying that making friends isn't about looks, but about being kind to one another. His friendly words moved me to tears. For the first time in my life, I felt the pure joy of having someone who truly wanted to be my friend. From that day on, we became friends. We walked to school together and left class together every day. The sight of us walking side by side made me slowly forget the lonely days of the past. At school, Wang Chen always stood up to protect me. Whenever anyone showed the slightest intent to bully me, he would intervene immediately. For the first time, I felt I had someone to lean on in that harsh environment. Each time after chasing away the mean-spirited students, Wang Chen would patiently comfort and encourage me. He told me I had done nothing wrong and that I shouldn't let others' stares make me feel inferior. But those peaceful days did not last long. I had no idea that behind this seemingly sincere friendship, a cruel truth was silently waiting for me to discover. That day, it was my turn for classroom duty, so I left later than usual. When school ended, I didn't see Wang Chen waiting for me as he usually did. I felt a slight sense of disappointment but suspected nothing. On my way home, I unexpectedly spotted Wang Chen smoking with two thugs. His face was cold and his words were vulgar, a complete departure from the kind image I had known. Instead of stepping out to greet him, I felt an impulse to hide quietly behind a wall. I held my breath and eavesdropped, sensing that what I was about to hear would change everything. He took a long drag of his cigarette with an arrogant posture. There wasn't a hint of friendliness left in him. For the first time, I realized the person standing before me was a terrifying stranger. Through the cigarette smoke, Wang Chen bragged smugly that I completely trusted him and considered him my best friend. He then loudly demanded his gambling winnings from the group. The others laughed, mocking my appearance and my naivety. One of them mockingly asked Wang Chen if he actually considered me a friend. The words that followed were even more heartless. Wang Chen began insulting my appearance, saying my scar disgusted him so much that it gave him nightmares at night. Hearing this, my heart felt as though it were being squeezed. Tears fell uncontrollably. It turned out the friendship I cherished was nothing more than a cheap bet in the eyes of others. Finally, Wang Chen urged them to hand over the money, nonchalantly declaring he would end his relationship with me, as if the act of using me made him feel dirty and annoyed. I quietly left my hiding spot, running and crying all the way home. It felt as if the rare bit of light that had appeared in my life had been extinguished without mercy. That night, I locked myself in my room. Though my mother knocked and asked what was wrong, I couldn't stop crying. My heart was shattered because, for the first time, I had dared to believe in friendship. The next morning at school, Wang Chen's attitude had completely changed. He began to mock and taunt me, exactly like the bullies who had tormented me before. I didn't react, nor did I look at him. I just quietly lowered my head and walked on, knowing in my heart that everything was over and I had returned to my old place of isolation. My silence enraged Wang Chen. He couldn't accept being ignored and felt his pride was insulted in front of everyone. Perhaps Wang Chen didn't expect that someone like me, who always bowed my head in submission, would dare to treat him as if he didn't exist. This only made him more furious. In a fit of rage, Wang Chen violently threw a powerful punch at me, an aggressive act intended to vent his frustration. Seeing that I still didn't resist or fight back, Wang Chen knocked me to the ground. The people around us just stood by and laughed. No one stopped him. He insulted me while beating me, using the most venomous words to trample on my self-esteem. When his hands grew tired, he finally stopped, hurling a few more words of contempt, treating me like trash. Before leaving, he spat on my face, an act that served as the final period to the fake friendship I had once believed in. Wang Chen and his group left. No one felt he had done anything wrong, and no one came to help me up. They left me lying curled up on the cold ground. Only when their figures had completely vanished and the schoolyard grew silent did I dare to move, engulfed in a sense of shame and pain. I slowly crawled up, brushed the dust off my clothes, and felt empty inside, as if I had become so accustomed to being hurt that I no longer had the strength to resist. After school that day, I didn't dare go home immediately, fearing I would run into Wang Chen. I quietly went up to the top floor of the school, a place where few people ever went. There was an old, sealed classroom there. Rumor had it that a student had suddenly died in that room, but no one ever found the cause. Every night, people claimed to hear piteous weeping coming from inside. Over time, these terrifying rumors spread wildly among the students. Because of this, the school had locked the room tight. Having been isolated for so long, I had never heard those bone-chilling rumors. Standing before the locked door, my heart felt cold. I realized I had nowhere left to hide from this pain. I turned to leave, but at that exact moment, a dry clicking sound echoed behind me as if the lock had popped open on its own. Startled, I turned back and saw the lock was indeed open. I didn't understand why, but in my confused state of mind, I simply thought it was old and broken. I pushed the door open and entered the pitch-black classroom, quickly closing it behind me as if trying to cut myself off from the malicious outside world. Inside the room were only a few sets of rotted desks and chairs covered in thick dust. I didn't care. I just sat quietly in a corner. Looking through the window, I watched the city slowly sink into darkness, wondering why a single scar could ruin my entire life like this. While I was drowning in despair, the silhouette of a girl suddenly appeared on the opposite wall, and the air in the room grew noticeably colder. The girl's skin was frightfully pale, and her large eyes were empty. There was also a massive scar on her face, completely destroying its beauty. Sensing something, I spun around. The surrounding space seemed to freeze. Even the sound of the wind outside the window vanished. Only the loud thumping of my heart echoed in my head. When I saw the girl's face clearly, I knew she wasn't human. Without waiting for me to speak, she introduced herself as Yuna, the student who had died tragically years ago. She had appeared because she felt a sense of empathy for me. She said she also needed a friend, just like I did. I looked at her, not knowing what to say. I wanted a friend, but I wanted a living, breathing one. Staring at the girl, a thought crossed my mind. I was already hated by everyone, so having a friend like this wasn't bad. I timidly asked her if she truly didn't mind the scar on my face. Hearing this, the girl laughed. She said she was just like me. Looking closely, although she had a small scar on her face, it didn't diminish her beautiful smile. The scar seemed to be a source of pain for Yuna as well. She continued, explaining that she hadn't died of natural causes. Because of the scar on her face, she had been constantly bullied. That day, she finally couldn't take it anymore and ended her life right here. As I listened to her story, I involuntarily burst into tears. It turned out the empathy she spoke of was because we carried the same wound not just on our faces, but in our hearts. Two people from two different spaces and two different worlds held each other's hands, a handshake symbolizing friendship. From then on, I no longer rushed home after school. Instead, I brought snacks to this classroom that other students feared to approach, sharing everything I saw and heard with her. We became friends who kept no secrets from each other. Although I was still bullied, having a friend to talk to made me feel that life was still joyful. With nearly identical scars and similar circumstances, it felt as though we were soulmates reunited. One day, I realized that after befriending her, my classmates gradually stopped bullying me. In fact, they began to avoid me. Today, I went to see her with a sad expression. Curious, she asked what was wrong. I honestly told her that I had spoken to my mother about the cost of plastic surgery and it was too expensive. I might have to carry this scar for the rest of my life. My friend laughed. She felt the reason for my sadness was no big deal, and then she told me to close my eyes. Listening to Yuna, I didn't ask why. I obediently closed my eyes. Then, she stroked her hand across my face. I only felt a bone-chilling cold against my skin. A moment later, I opened my eyes and asked curiously what she had done. She didn't explain. She just told me to go to the window and look at my reflection. I walked to the window and was stunned by my reflection. The scar on my face was gone. The smooth skin immediately enhanced my appearance significantly. I asked her in confusion why she didn't remove the scar on her own face. She smiled, saying she could help me but couldn't do it for herself. At the time, we didn't know that all of this was being witnessed by Wang Chen, who had secretly followed me. Wang Chen made no sound. He said nothing, turned around, and slinked away from the school. Wang Chen found the friends who used to bully me and told them everything he had seen. They were somewhat frightened by the story. However, Wang Chen was a person who hated seeing others do well. Seeing the girl's miracle, he felt, why should an ugly person like me have such luck? He decided he had to destroy my good fortune so that I would be miserable and isolated once again. Wang Chen narrowed his eyes into thin slits, giving off the impression that he was a dangerous person to cross. Following a recommendation, Wang Chen found an expert named Old Demon who was said to possess powerful Taoist magic. He approached him and asked for the most effective way to deal with an evil spirit. Old Demon gave him a talisman, saying that if he stuck it on the spirit's forehead, it would be unable to manifest. Wang Chen looked at the talisman and felt this wasn't enough. He wanted to kill my friend so she could never be liberated. Old Demon said that in this world, only evil spirits deserve to be killed. Harming a pitiful soul would damage one's own karmic merit. Hearing this, Wang Chen put on an act of being a good friend. He knelt and begged Old Demon, pleading for him to save a classmate being tormented by an evil spirit. Hearing that a student was being harassed by a ghost, Old Demon immediately felt the urge to help. He asked for the details so he could go in person. Wang Chen panicked when he heard Old Demon wanted to come along and quickly made up an excuse to keep him there. If Old Demon found out his true intentions, he certainly wouldn't help. Thinking Wang Chen was just a student with no reason to deceive him, Old Demon didn't suspect anything. He handed over a jet black nail, telling him that driving this nail into the spirit's forehead would prevent it from ever being reincarnated. Having achieved his goal, Wang Chen took the nail and left immediately. Old Demon watched him leave in a hurry and couldn't help but warn him. Use it only if absolutely necessary. Killing the wrong soul would surely bring karmic retribution. That day, as usual, I went to the classroom after school to find my friend. We laughed and chatted, seemingly never running out of things to say. I even bragged to her that my mother said I looked handsome and that the person who helped me must be an angel. Just as we were having the best time, Wang Chen suddenly kicked the door open. He laughed with smug satisfaction, declaring that today he would kill the evil spirit and rid everyone of the threat. He had brought 2 others with him. Before we could even react, Wang Chen slapped the talisman onto the girl's face. The 2 accompanying him grabbed me tightly, making me unable to move. With the talisman on her, the girl's body couldn't move. She looked at Wang Chen in terror, while he grinned with a sinister and terrifying smile. He said he would make her disappear. After saying that, he pulled out the hidden nail and drove it forcefully into her forehead. She let out a piteous scream, and her entire body flashed with a pale green light. My heart burned with agony as I watched, but I could only scream desperately. Unfortunately, it was too late. As her scream faded away, she turned into a wisp of blue smoke and vanished with the wind. In extreme pain, I used all my strength to break free from the 2 men's grip and lunged toward Wang Chen and where she had been. Like a madman, I grabbed Wang Chen and began to claw and bite him. The other 2 quickly rushed forward to pull me off. Wang Chen, still shaken by the scene he had just witnessed, didn't hit me as he usually did. He just threw a typical insult at me and led his 2 friends away. I collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, wishing I could just die. I felt that I was the one who had caused her death. My heart was in pieces. Afterward, I requested a leave of absence from school. I didn't want to go back anymore, feeling that life had no meaning. I hid in my house alone, refusing to come out no matter who called. Not long after, Wang Chen was in a car accident. Both of his legs had to be amputated from the thigh down, leaving him disabled. He lay in his hospital bed, weeping piteously. At that moment, Old Demon reappeared by Wang Chen's bedside. Looking at him, his eyes seemed to see straight through his soul. He said that if that nail encountered an evil spirit, it would destroy it, but a virtuous soul would be sent directly to reincarnation. Old Demon seemed unwilling to look at Wang Chen any longer. He turned to leave the ward, leaving only one final sentence. His luck had vanished because of the evil he had done. This was his deserved retribution. Wang Chen lay on the bed, shedding late tears of regret. Old demon's words would surely haunt him for the rest of his life. That day, I cried until I was exhausted and fell asleep. I had a strange dream. I dreamed of her. She told me everything that had happened. She said that because she hadn't done anything evil, she was able to go to reincarnation. Meanwhile, Wang Chen faced retribution for his malice. She told me to live a good life. The next day, I went to school. I didn't hide anymore. As I had promised, I had to face life positively for myself and also for her. Making friends cannot be based solely on appearance. One must use the heart to communicate. The definition of good and bad is not a simple frame. Everyone's life is different. One cannot deny oneself or others because of a minor flaw. If you love others, they will always love you back. If you respect others, they will always respect you back. My name is Wang Fang. I graduated in 2000. Unable to find a job at a major hospital, I had to accept a position at a nursing home in the suburbs. My family is from the countryside, and my parents worked hard to support my education. Because I wasn't diligent, I failed the university entrance exam and was forced to start working early to help my family. On my first day, I was taken to meet the director, a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with sharp but rather calm eyes. In her office, the walls and display cabinets were filled with banners and medals, proving that this nursing home had once been quite well managed. The director arranged for a staff member to show me around the environment and give me a brief introduction to the areas within the facility. She showed me the common room, where the elderly usually gathered during the day to chat. The nursing home had 2 floors. It wasn't large, but had all the necessary facilities. Next was the residents' bedroom area, with a total of 13 rooms, 2 people per room. The number of elderly people here was just over 20, not too crowded.
And here
Finally, she led me to the staff dormitory, saying that only I and another person named Liu Wan stayed here, and told me to choose an empty bed. Most of the staff were locals who went home at night. Only Liu Wan and I were from out of town and had to stay in the dormitory. After instructing me to unpack and get used to the environment, the guiding nurse said I didn't need to work today. The official schedule would be arranged tomorrow. I didn't have much luggage, so unpacking was quick. Although the dormitory room was simple, it was acceptable. Just as I finished tidying up and was about to go out for a walk, I opened the door and heard a harsh, scolding voice from the end of the hallway, making me jump. That was the first time I saw Liu Wan. She was standing in front of a bedroom, loudly berating an old woman with an extremely unpleasant attitude. The old woman had placed a charcoal basin in front of her door to burn joss paper. Liu Wan was shouting while kicking the basin, bringing up a past incident where she had nearly caused a fire. The old woman trembled as she explained that someone had come to demand money from her, forcing her to burn it for them, which was why she did it in the hallway. Liu Wan didn't listen to the explanation at all, loudly scolding her for being superstitious and even threatening to starve her, proving this wasn't the first time. Seeing the old woman having difficulty moving, I stepped forward to help her clean up the charcoal basin and the scattered paper money, hoping the incident would end quickly. Liu Wan immediately turned to question who I was. her tone full of wariness and annoyance, clearly not friendly to strangers. I hurriedly introduced myself as the new employee, Wang Fang. Hearing that, Liu Wan stopped interrogating me, but her eyes still showed suspicion. After cleaning up, I helped the old woman back to her room to rest, trying to say a few comforting words to calm her fear and agitation. Before entering the room, the old woman turned back and glared at Liu Wan with resentment, saying she would sooner or later face retribution for what she had done. Hearing this, Liu Wan became even angrier, immediately declaring that she wouldn't give the old woman dinner tonight. The familiar tone suggested this wasn't the first punishment. I helped the old woman sit on the bed and gently asked why she was burning paper in the hallway, hoping to better understand why she was scolded. The old woman sighed, looking at the empty bed next to her, and said she was burning it for a good sister who used to share the room but had died unjustly. Hearing this, I guessed the roommate had passed away, but I didn't understand why the old woman used the words "died unjustly" with such a resentful tone. I casually asked more about that person's death, not expecting the question to make the old woman's face change instantly. She suddenly became agitated, asserting that Liu Wan had killed her roommate, her voice trembling but full of certainty. I quickly reassured her, saying such things shouldn't be said lightly, although deep down, I recognized a deep conflict existed between the old woman and Liu Wan. The old woman sat up, insisting it wasn't a fabrication, but that a friend had appeared in a dream and told her everything clearly. Seeing the old woman's mental state was unstable, I made an excuse about needing to work to leave the room, avoiding continuing the conversation that made me feel uneasy. Standing in the hallway, I suddenly thought about having to interact with such elderly people every day, and my heart felt indescribably heavy. Just as I was lost in thought, a voice suddenly spoke beside me, making my heart skip a beat because it was so close. It turned out Liu Wan was still standing outside the door, seemingly intentionally waiting to see what the old woman had said to me, her eyes full of suspicion. Hearing me say the old woman hadn't said anything, Liu Wan left, but not without reminding me that I absolutely must not give the old woman dinner tonight. From that moment, Liu Wan left an extremely bad impression on me. She was cold, cruel, and seemed to have no love for this job. In the evening, I was called down to the cafeteria to help prepare dinner for the elderly residents. Most of the elderly ate in the common cafeteria. Only those with mobility issues had meals brought to their rooms by staff. Remembering Liu Wan's instructions, I looked around the cafeteria but indeed didn't see the old woman from the afternoon. That behavior disgusted me, so I decided to go to the director's office to report the incident. However, what I thought was serious, the director listened to with little concern, her attitude completely indifferent. The director said, "Old people are often as stubborn as children and require strong measures like Liu Wan's to manage." Her words clearly defensive. I was dismissed early, so I left the office with a strange feeling rising in my heart, as if everyone in this nursing home had something abnormal about them. I didn't know if it was out of sympathy for the old woman in room 201 or a desire to understand what was going on, but I went to the supermarket to buy biscuits and milk, intending to bring them to her. Just as I reached the door, I heard voices inside the room. At first, I thought someone was visiting her, but when I looked through the glass, it wasn't so. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, talking to herself towards the empty bed opposite. Something about definitely helping someone named Ami cry for justice. She also talked about burning joss paper during the day, as if there were a person right in front of her. I stood outside watching for a while, and after some thought, I decided to push the door open and enter. I stated my purpose. Seeing she hadn't gone to dinner, I brought her some food and casually asked who she was talking to. She said her roommate named Ami had come to visit and told her she was killed by Liu Wan, asking her to help take revenge. I tried using the method the director taught, treating her like a child, and asked about the roommate. Why didn't she go find Liu Wan for revenge herself instead of asking her? I intended to expose her so she couldn't make up stories anymore, but unexpectedly, she said Liu Wan had some kind of protective talisman, so she couldn't get close. I decisively told her to let me meet the roommate named Ami. Only then would I believe her and help her cry for justice. I thought I would stump her, but unexpectedly she appeared very confident, saying she could let me meet her, but also warned that ordinary people meeting ghosts would suffer illness or bad luck at best, or lose their lives at worst. I didn't believe in ghosts at all, so I went along with her words. I even joked that if she wasn't afraid, why should I be? Seeing my fearless attitude, she told me to come find her tomorrow night, and she would let me meet her roommate, named Ami. I waited for her to finish eating, talked for a while longer, and only left when she went to rest. That night, returning to the dormitory, I saw Liu Wan washing her face at the sink, the atmosphere in the room suffocatingly silent. I accidentally noticed she was wearing a strange pendant around her neck and asked if it was a protective talisman. Unexpectedly, Liu Wan reacted harshly, warning me to just do my job well and not meddle in other people's business. The next day, officially working, I took the opportunity to ask the guiding nurse about the old woman in room 201, since she was a long-time employee. She advised me it was best to stay away from that old woman, saying she was very ominous and no one in the nursing home dared to get close. That warning only made me more curious. I gathered my courage and asked her to explain exactly what was so ominous. The nurse said the old woman used to be a spirit medium. Later, she developed Alzheimer's, so her children sent her to the nursing home. The scary thing was that whenever the old woman said someone was about to die, they would die within 3 days. She had witnessed it herself. Hearing this, I froze, suddenly remembering the appointment to meet the old woman in the evening, and an indescribable fear rose in my heart. By evening, I deliberately washed up and returned to my bedroom, deciding not to meet the old woman as originally agreed. But as soon as I stepped out of the bathroom, a sudden sight made my heart nearly stop. The old woman appeared unexpectedly in front of me, her voice clearly reproachful, asking why I hadn't come to find her as promised. I awkwardly made up an excuse about being busy, a feeling of being stalked rising within me, extremely uncomfortable and frightening. The old woman ignored my reluctance, adopting a forceful attitude, telling me to follow her because everything was ready. Reluctantly, I followed her into her room. The door was locked from the inside, and the wardrobe mirror was covered with a red cloth, creating a creepy feeling. The old woman told me to sit on the bed and brought out a bowl of raw rice, saying the ritual was about to begin. She asked me to close my eyes, instructing that no matter what I heard or saw, I shouldn't be afraid, as the person coming wouldn't harm me. At that moment, my feelings were extremely conflicted. I wanted to run away, but was also curious about what the old woman would do next, so I decided to sit still. After scattering rice around, the old woman began to hop about, muttering incantations, and the air in the room gradually became cold. About a few minutes later, the old woman said the roommate had arrived, then helped me stand up. The bone-chilling cold gave me goosebumps. Although my eyes were closed, I still felt myself being led in front of the covered wardrobe mirror. A strange voice rang out from in front, claiming to be Ami, saying that I could help her. The sound was not like the old woman's voice. The voice recounted being pushed down the stairs by Liu Wan to her death, begging me to help cry for justice, making my whole body tremble. The fear reached its limit, and unable to hold back, I opened my eyes to see who on earth was talking to me. In the mirror appeared the image of a strange old woman looking straight at me, her face deformed but her mouth still moving as if speaking. Overwhelmed by fear beyond endurance, I screamed in terror and recoiled violently backwards, my heart pounding wildly. When I looked again, the mirror only reflected my own image. The other old woman had completely vanished. Unable to distinguish reality from illusion, I unlocked the door and rushed out, running away in panic, ignoring the old woman calling after me. In the following days, I deliberately avoided the old woman, finally understanding why everyone in the nursing home feared and shunned her. About a week later, I witnessed Liu Wan and the old woman struggling fiercely in the hallway. Many people tried to intervene but couldn't. I worriedly asked the colleague standing there what was happening, an ominous premonition rising in my heart. The nurse colleague said the old woman had stolen Liu Wan's protective talisman, and Liu Wan was determined to get it back at all costs. "Over there!" Liu Wan screamed for the old woman to return the talisman, looking more panicked than usual, completely out of control. I guessed part of the reason but didn't want to get further involved, so I took a detour to leave that hallway. Returning in the evening, I saw police cars and an ambulance at the nursing home gate, the tense atmosphere suggesting something serious had happened. Reaching the third floor, I saw a crowd gathered around the stairs and asked a colleague what was wrong. They said Liu Wan had fallen down the stairs and was currently in extremely critical condition, unlikely to survive. According to everyone, Liu Wan didn't take the elevator but chose the stairs, then suddenly slipped and fell for unknown reasons. Medical staff carried a body covered in a white cloth out, blood soaking through. Just a glance was enough to know the person was no longer alive. People discussed it, not understanding why Liu Wan took the stairs, and mentioned that a few months ago, an old woman had also fallen to her death in this exact spot. The steps where the accident happened looked completely normal, neither slippery nor damaged, making the death even more baffling. While my thoughts were in turmoil, a soft chuckle rang out behind me, mentioning the word retribution. That word made my scalp tingle because that old woman was certainly the roommate of the deceased. I turned around and saw it was indeed that old woman, slowly walking away, her hunched back disappearing at the end of the hallway. I intended to chase after her to clarify everything, but stopped, telling myself not to invite more trouble. I only worked at that nursing home for exactly 1 month before quitting. Later, I heard the place was accused of mistreating the elderly but quickly resumed operations. As for the real cause, I dared not investigate further. My memories drift back to the year 2019, to the days when my family still resided in the Moon apartment complex. It was a block of buildings stained with the patina of age, where the scent of decay mingled with a silence so profound it stirred an instinctive dread. At the heart of the complex lay a small square, home to a pond of putrid, stagnant water. Curiously, a maintenance sign hung there as a perpetual fixture, yet no workman ever graced its banks to tend to the rot. Despite its sinister aura, the square remained a communal hub where residents gathered and children played. They complained incessantly of the mosquitoes swarming the surface, oblivious to the fact that something far more predatory lurked within the lightless depths. The water surface was choked with aquatic weeds and drifting refuse. Over time, the pool had thickened into a viscous, ink-black void, concealing beneath its deathly stillness layers of foul, reeking mire. The elders enforced a strict decree. No child was to venture near the water's edge. To us, the pond resembled the cavernous maw of an ancient leviathan, patiently waiting to swallow any soul that might lose its footing. The tragedy germinated on a cold September night, as a thick fog began to shroud the world shortly after 8 p.m. The stillness was so absolute that the wind whistling through the door cracks sounded like the keening of lost souls. That evening, we dined later than usual. Under the flickering, jaundiced light of the kitchen, a creeping chill touched my spine, causing the warmth of our family meal to evaporate into the shadows. Suddenly, the silence of the night was lacerated by agonizing screams rising from below, a frantic herald of the calamity that had just struck. I dropped my utensils, my heart heavy with an unspoken foreboding. I approached the window and eased it open to peer into the abyss of the square. Panic gripped the crowd gathered at the water's edge. Wails of grief tore through the oppressive air, calling out for a lost child. There, upon the cold earth, lay a small, motionless form bereft of breath. The wretched child was draped in aquatic weeds and black, odorous sludge. It was Tony, my son's constant playmate, now claimed forever by the stagnant heart of the pond. I stood paralyzed by the cruelty of fate. A leaden sorrow filled my chest as I witnessed the hollow eyes of a parent grieving a child, a sight that haunts the soul even when the blood is not your own. The aftermath was a bitter cycle of lawsuits between the family and the management. The square fell into ruin. It became a desolate wasteland, a death zone where no living soul dared to tread. 2 weeks passed, and as the edge of the grief began to dull, a new shadow fell upon us. Late one evening, my son had not returned, leaving my wife frantic and urging me to find him. I stepped toward the window, where the darkness of the square felt like a beast poised to breach our home. As the latch turned, a gust of icy air rushed in, caressing my skin with a ghostly touch. I cast my gaze into the void and shouted my son's name, my voice echoing into the hollow night. Immediately following my call, a small silhouette detached itself from the gloom of the square and moved toward the building. In my heart, I felt certain it was my son racing back to safety. Closing the window, I grumbled to my wife about the boy's wanderlust, vowing to discipline him. I had no inkling that my summons had inadvertently beckoned something that did not belong to our world. That fateful call had invited an unthinkable disaster into our sanctuary, marking the beginning of a haunting that would plunge my family into a well of terror. My son returned, ate, and retired to bed as if it were any other day. Yet, As the world fell into a deep slumber, the anomalies began to manifest. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by the sound of strange, rhythmic footsteps echoing from the living room. My initial thought was that my son had risen to use the bathroom, but the steps were aimless, pacing back and forth in a wandering cadence that felt entirely inhuman. Irritation flared. I barked a command from the bedroom, hoping to startle the child back to his bed. Instead of silence, I was met with the defiant crash of porcelain shattering against the floor, a sharp, challenging sound in the darkness. Fury ignited within me. I lunged from the bed and threw open the door, determined to teach the boy a lesson he wouldn't forget. The sight that met me was one of absolute chaos. Furniture was overturned, shattered vases littered the floor, and the room looked as though it had been scoured by a localized gale. Seething with rage, I marched to my son's room and threw open the door, my tongue sharpened for a bitter rebuke. However, I found my son fast asleep, his breathing steady and rhythmic. The serenity on his face told me he was not feigning slumber. An icy shiver traced the length of my spine, freezing me in place. If the boy was asleep here, what or who was the entity desecrating my living room? Riddled with doubt, I retreated. To my waking wife, I whispered hollow comforts to mask the tide of horror rising in my throat. The following morning, a piercing scream from my wife in the living room sent me bolting upright like a coiled spring. I rushed out to find her trembling, her face a pallid mask of terror, her hand pointing shakily at the floor. Across the floor, over the tea table, and even upon the sofa were tiny, muddy footprints. They were slick with black sludge and exhaled the overwhelming stench of stagnant pond water. Fear took complete possession of our minds. My son eventually woke, looking haggard and morose. Through tears, he recounted a nightmare that had plagued his sleep. He claimed he saw Tony, his departed friend, standing in the center of the room, beckoning him to come out and play. When my son refused out of fear, Tony became enraged and began to destroy everything in sight. His words made the hair on my neck stand on end. Connecting the dots to the previous night, I realized it was no dream. A malevolent presence was truly within our walls. The days that followed were a living hell. The refrigerator would be flung open, food scattered and mingling with those foul, viscous, muddy tracks. Even the bathroom faucets would turn themselves on at midnight, gushing at full force as if trying to drown the house in the filth of the abyss. Our family took to huddling together on a single bed, none of us daring to close our eyes, as the phantom sounds of the dark continued their ceaseless torment. In our desperation, I followed my mother-in-law's counsel and sought out a renowned spiritual master, setting aside my lifelong skepticism for the sake of survival. The master entered our home with a grave and somber countenance. As he surveyed the shadowed room, I prayed he could excise this lingering nightmare. After circling the apartment, he stopped before the window, noting that it faced a source of heavy yin energy. He asked solemnly if I had opened it at an ill-omened hour. I confessed to opening the window and calling my son's name on that cursed night. The master's sigh was a cold current that chilled me to the marrow. He revealed that I had committed a grave error. Calling a child's name into the night had guided Tony's vengeful, water-bound spirit directly from the pond into my home. To prove his words, he produced a small, circular mirror and instructed me on how to peer through the veil that blinds the living. That night, I extinguished every light but remained awake. I sat in a darkened corner, listening to the frantic thudding of my heart against my ribs. Hiding behind the bedroom door, I strained to hear the slightest movement until those familiar, wet footsteps began to echo once more. I eased the door open a crack, my hands trembling as I held the mirror out exactly as the master had instructed. Through the murky reflection of the glass, a horrific image appeared that froze the blood in my veins, a sight I shall never erase from my mind. A child, caked in black mud, his skin bloated and ashen from long immersion, was trudging through the room like a mindless husk, searching for a lost life. Looking at that small, hunched back radiating such palpable malice, there was no doubt. It was Tony the boy who had perished in the black water. Each of his steps left a trail of deathly sludge that reeked of the grave. He still believed he had been called home to play. I cannot recall how I endured the remainder of that night. The sensation of a dead soul lingering mere feet away is a psychological torment beyond words. At the break of dawn, I sought out Tony's family. I explained the haunting and begged his mother to come to my door and call her son's name back to her, following the master's ritual. The poor mother wailed her child's name through a torrent of tears. That mournful sound was enough to pierce the heart of any witness. The master then performed a solemn ritual to guide the child's soul to rest, ensuring he would no longer wander this cold, intermediate world. Following the ceremony, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The midnight footsteps and the stench of the pond vanished as if they had never been. Yet, since that day, my windows remain locked and the curtains drawn tight. I would rather live forever under the hum of electric lights than risk opening that portal even once more. The master's warding mirror still hangs outside the window as a final protection. Though we have since moved away, the memory of that uninvited guest remains a haunting shadow that lengthens every time the sun sets. This is a bizarre true story that happened to my friend. It took place in 2014 in an ordinary residential area in the heart of a bustling city. My friend's name is Louis, a government official working far from home in the distant United States. Due to various issues, his wife and child remained in their home country. After a long leave of absence, he eagerly returned to his nest, calling out to greet his wife and son the moment he stepped inside. Liam, his son, who had just started 3rd grade, could not hide his joy at seeing his father again after 6 months of separation. Louis always felt guilty about the lack of time spent with his son, so every time he returned, he prepared carefully selected gifts. This time, it was a unique clown doll. A gift he had gone to great lengths to find at a shop in California. Unlike other children his age who liked cars or toy guns, Liam had a special passion for figurines and dolls. The boy was fascinated by the new gift, constantly marveling at the exquisite craftsmanship and the clown's flexible movements. From that day on, Liam seemed to live only in his own world in his bedroom, staying inseparable from his cloth companion. Louis and his wife were secretly happy that the expensive gift made their son happy, seeing it as a small compensation for his father's absence. The 10 short days of leave passed quickly, and Louis hurriedly set off again, promising to see his wife and son during the Lunar New Year. When Tet came, Louis returned in anticipation, but this time, only his wife greeted him with a face heavy with worry. Unlike her usual self, as soon as he dropped his luggage, Louis anxiously asked about Liam's absence. Normally, the boy was always the first to welcome his father home. Louis's wife worriedly recounted to her husband the strange behaviors their son had exhibited during his absence. She said that Liam seemed to have turned into a different person. He locked himself in his room, cut off communication, and only muttered conversations to the clown doll. Despite visiting many places for checkups, doctors only diagnosed him with autism resulting from the lack of a father's affection. Louis gently entered the room, intending to surprise his son with familiar jokes. However, strangely, Liam completely ignored his father's words, sitting with his back turned in an incomprehensible coldness. Just as Louis lightly touched his shoulder, the boy suddenly whipped around, his eyes rolling back as he screamed in anger, demanding his father not to touch him. Liam's haggard face, dark circles under his eyes, and ferocious look left Louis and his wife in total shock. The wife sorrowfully confirmed that this condition had begun immediately after he left home last time. Seeing his son in such a dilapidated state, Louis felt as if a knife were cutting through his mind, and a surge of remorse filled his heart. He still thought his long absence had caused his son's autism. Louis suppressed his heartbreak and gently approached his son, intending to invite him to play the horseback riding game they used to play. Louis reached for the clown doll in Liam's hand to start the game. He could never have expected that action to trigger an explosion. Liam began to scream frantically, his body shaking violently as he struggled to take the doll back from his father's hands. Hearing the blood-curdling scream and his son's aggressive reaction, Louis stood frozen, beads of cold sweat rolling down his face in fear. That once childish face was now distorted like a wild beast, his bloodshot eyes filled with terrifying veins. The wife rushed in to intervene, confessing that she had also tried to take the doll before, but the result was equally horrific. Only now did they truly realize the severity of the psychological illness their child was suffering from. In the quiet living room, the couple resolved to take Liam to see a leading specialist the next morning. Night fell, but an even more bizarre event awaited them in the shadows. At midnight, while Louis was sound asleep from the exhaustion of his long journey, his wife woke up to use the restroom. As she passed the living room, she suddenly heard strange noises coming from the kitchen along with a flickering dark shadow. Pushing the door open to look inside, she was stunned to see Liam squatting in front of the wide-open refrigerator. Initially, she was happy, thinking her son was hungry and was proactively looking for food after so many days of lethargy. However, when the boy turned his head, a horrifying scene appeared. Liam was devouring a piece of raw blood-stained meat, his eyes white and soulless. Liam saw his mother and cackled. Overwhelmed with terror, she collapsed to the floor, only able to gasp her son's name in despair. Liam's face was now completely deformed, with blood and flesh smeared around his eyes and mouth like a horror clown as he slowly approached his mother. While the mother sat paralyzed on the ground, Louis, hearing his wife scream, rushed in and tightly held Liam to stop his aggression. Finding himself restrained, the boy struggled frantically, kicking and punching wildly while constantly screaming for meat. That image was no longer that of a child, but like a bloodthirsty creature waiting to devour its own kind. Early the next morning, Louis rushed his son to see the most famous psychologist in the city. Given his highly agitated state, the specialist was forced to administer a sedative to help Liam calm down. In the office, the doctor began to investigate thoroughly the cause of this peculiar illness. The initial analysis still pointed toward the lack of affection from the father, which made Louis feel even more tormented. The doctor asked Louis if anything had happened previously. During their conversation, Louis happened to mention the gift of the clown doll from North America. The specialist's gaze suddenly changed. He showed particular interest in that toy and immediately asked Louis to bring it in for him to see. Sensing something unusual, Louis immediately went home to get the doll and brought it back for the doctor to examine. After a careful inspection, the specialist vaguely guessed something and suddenly asked about the true origin of the item. Louis was astonished when the doctor correctly guessed that it came from the Mexican border region. It was a shop near his workplace. The specialist revealed that he had spent time on a medical exchange in Mexico, so he was very knowledgeable about these occult and sinister things. He sternly asserted that this was an extremely malevolent object that locals would never dare to keep in their homes. Afterward, the doctor did not hide anything and told them everything he knew about this doll. It turned out that this type of doll was crafted by indigenous people in Mexico. The materials used to make them were almost entirely comprised of real human skin and hair. This type of doll was used by locals as an offering to feed the souls of the deceased, especially the souls of children who died young. Indigenous people usually hung these dolls on trees or in graves and absolutely never allowed children to play with them. Over time, these evil spirits would become bloodthirsty and were often used by black sorcerers in rituals to summon demons. As he listened, Louis felt a cold shiver run down his spine, realizing he had brought this calamity upon his own son. He hurriedly begged the doctor to find a way to dispel this evil spirit. The specialist shook his head and sighed, as he was only a doctor and not an exorcist who could break a curse. His only advice at that moment was to take the doll far away, as far from Liam as possible. Looking at the sinful doll, a surge of anger rose within Louis because a soulless toy had destroyed his family. He decided that he would personally end the existence of this evil object, so it could no longer harass his son. That night, in the middle of the silent night, Louis took the doll to a vacant lot in a park. He coldly threw it to the ground and poured gasoline all over the ceramic and cloth body of the clown doll. Although he didn't know if this method would be effective, it was the only choice he had to save his son. A spark was ignited in the deep darkness, then slowly dropped, carrying with it something incredibly eerie. The gasoline-soaked fire immediately flared up, devouring the clown doll in an instant. A pungent, foul stench arose, like the smell of charred animal flesh, making Louis shudder. After about 10 minutes, all that remained was a pile of black ashes under the moonlight. Everything finally came to a close here, returning peace to Louis' family as well as the neighborhood. After a few days of treatment, Liam gradually recovered. His complexion turned rosy again, and he began playing basketball with his friends. Witnessing his son become lively and cheerful again, Louis was finally able to lift the burden from his heart. He also decided to trade his career path, requesting a transfer back to his home country to be close to his family. This horror story occurred in 1960 during a nationwide movement to dig deep shelters for food storage in preparation for World War III. The campaign was highly active across the country, with citizens everywhere enthusiastically excavating the earth. From mountains to plains, the ground was hollowed out, creating countless deep caves through massive mountain ranges. It began in a Shandong village where locals were diligently digging into a mountain following the collective call. While working, a villager named Liu Jifeng stopped when his pickaxe struck a hard object that did not feel like natural rock. When questioned by others, a trembling Jifeng explained it wasn't a normal boulder, but a man-made stone wall. After clearing the soil, they discovered a solid wall of large blue stone slabs blocking the path deeper into the mountain. Suspecting it was a Japanese military relic, they decided to break through the wall to discover what lay behind it. A hole revealed a pitch-black, bottomless abyss. However, curiosity quickly outweighed their fear of the supernatural. 4 brave men were tied together with a long rope and instructed to signal immediately if any trouble arose. Holding dim flashlights, the 4 men ventured into the darkness while those outside held the rope to maintain contact. After they moved over 100 meters in and the rope was nearly at its limit, it suddenly began shaking violently. Terrifying screams for help echoed from the depths, prompting the panicked villagers to pull the rope back frantically. Despite their effort, the rope suddenly felt strangely light, and they quickly hauled the remaining length back to the surface. A horrific sight met them. The end of the rope was soaked in fresh, dripping crimson blood. The 4 men had vanished completely, leaving behind only empty, blood-stained loops on the ground. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the terrified villagers immediately reported the incident to the authorities. The case received immediate attention, and an armed squad was dispatched to investigate the mystery inside the cave. Inside, they found bloodstains, shredded clothing, and torn shoes scattered across the floor, but no sign of the men. While the villagers remained missing, the team discovered numerous coffins placed deep within the cavern. 4 coffins were found sealed within large pools of blood, requiring significant effort from experts to eventually open them. Despite a thorough search, the military found no other exits or secret passages. All traces ended in a mystery. With no answers regarding the missing men, the archaeological team eventually removed all findings from the cave. Once the investigation ended, the entrance was sealed with stones, burying the unsolved mysteries underground forever. The second story occurred at a private coal mine in Shandong, where workers failed to find coal despite digging very deep. The owner became increasingly irritable and desperate, having invested a fortune without seeing any results. Ignoring the workers' discouragement, the owner ordered them to keep digging at any cost until they struck coal. Fearful workers hesitated, knowing the primitive mine lacked safety measures and that digging deeper invited disaster. Driven by the pressure to survive, they continued until a loud blast revealed a hole into a dark, hollow cavern. A freezing wind blew from the opening, carrying the sound of mournful wailing and sobbing from the deep darkness. Even the most veteran miners had never encountered such eerie or unsettling sounds in their entire careers. Panic set in as some speculated they had accidentally dug a tunnel straight into the underworld. The sentient wailing seemed to creep out of the cave, piercing the ears of everyone present and causing chills. The melancholic sound acted like an invisible hand stirring their minds, causing unbearable mental agony. Chaos erupted as everyone began writhing in pain, with blood flowing uncontrollably from their eyes, noses, and ears. Only 2 people survived the horrific ordeal. The rest were eventually carried away in body bags. Following the tragedy, the cave was blasted shut, and the mine was permanently abandoned without yielding any coal. This is a strange incident I encountered back in high school. At that time, I had to attend evening extra classes every night. When I arrived home, it was past 9 in the evening. I stood alone before the quiet apartment building with yellow light filtering through the window bars. That day was like any other. After finishing my evening self-study session, I returned home alone. The apartment hallway was quiet and old. Our home was on the 5th floor of an old-style apartment complex. To get home, I had to pass through a narrow, dark, and gloomy staircase. That day, as I reached the 4th floor, I saw a strange figure standing in front of Mr. Jack's door. Several lights on the staircase were broken, so the lighting wasn't very good. But the silhouette looked very much like Mr. Jack, who lived on the 4th floor. Mr. Jack could be said to be someone who had watched me grow up since childhood. He was as familiar as a relative in this old building. I politely greeted him, wanting to show some concern, and asked him why he was still standing there so late. But Mr. Jack just kept standing in the corner, appearing as if he didn't hear what I said, not paying me any attention at all. I knew he was frequently scolded by his daughter-in-law, and sometimes even kicked out of the house, so I said nothing more and brushed past him. As usual, my mother was always waiting for me on the living room sofa until I returned. I really wanted to tell her about what had just happened. While taking off my backpack, I told my mother that Mr. Jack from the floor below had been kicked out again by his daughter-in-law to stand outside in the middle of the night. My mother looked a bit astonished hearing that. She wondered aloud, saying Mr. Jack had just been hospitalized this afternoon and couldn't have been discharged so quickly. I paused for a moment. I had clearly seen him standing in the corner in front of their door, even though he didn't answer when I spoke. My mother felt this was quite strange. He had fallen down the stairs this afternoon, a rather heavy fall, so he was taken to the hospital. He couldn't have checked out so fast. My mother asked me a few more times if I had misseen him, whether I really saw him or if it was just an illusion caused by the dim light. I was very certain I couldn't have been mistaken, because the distance was very close. It was just that when I called out, he didn't care to notice me. While eating, I asked in detail about Mr. Jack's fall to confirm the time it happened. My mother said that around 4 p.m. today, while she was sitting watching TV, she heard a commotion out in the hallway. My mother immediately went out to see and found a crowd of people gathered in the hallway and on the stairs. She asked what had happened and why so many people were gathering there. It looked very unusual. She heard from a neighbor that Mr. Jack had slipped and fallen down the stairs. The situation was quite serious, leaving everyone in shock. My mother also squeezed through and leaned over to look down, her face showing clear tension and fear at the sight below. My mother saw Mr. Jack collapsed on the steps, covered in blood. It was a very tragic sight. People called an ambulance. When Mr. Jack was carried away, my mother said half of his face was crushed, a bloody mess, very terrifying. After hearing my mother, I began to feel scared. Mr. Jack was old. With such a serious injury, he couldn't have been discharged early. Could it be that what I saw was his spirit? Hearing that, my mother scolded me, saying I wasn't allowed to talk nonsense. I didn't sleep well that night, having continuous nightmares. The next morning, I was woken up by the sound of funeral music. In my drowsiness, I asked my mother whose house had a death. The funeral horns were so loud they startled me awake. My mother said Mr. Jack had died. He was taken to the hospital yesterday and passed away in the afternoon. Hearing that, My heart raced and a chill ran down my spine. That morning on the way to school, my heart was uneasy as I had to pass by Mr. Jack's door. My footsteps slowed down unconsciously. The door was open, and I instinctively glanced into the room. The chill down my spine intensified. Inside the house was an altar with Mr. Jack's funeral portrait, incense and lamps set out. The atmosphere of mourning made me stand still. Looking at his portrait, he looked very kind and virtuous, but I still felt a coldness at the back of my neck and an inexplicable unease. When I stepped to the spot where he had fallen yesterday, there were still bloodstains on the stairs that hadn't been wiped clean yet. Thinking about how I had stepped on these very steps last night, a cold sweat broke out, and I got goosebumps all over. For the first few days after Mr. Jack passed away, every night I asked my mother to wait for me on the ground floor so we could go up together. My mother led the way, casually asking how school was. I said it was fine. Nothing happened, because in truth, I was very scared inside. It took more than a week for the influence of that event to fade. Only then did I dare finish my evening classes and return home alone. That day, my heart was still in my mouth. As I climbed the stairs, a sense of unease enveloped the entire journey. I walked slowly. The further I went, the more I felt someone following closely behind. The sound of footsteps made my blood run cold. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest, then turned my head to look back in the dark hallway. Just one glance and I was so scared, my soul nearly left my body. My heart raced, and my whole body went cold. The person following me was the deceased Mr. Jack. The left half of his face was mangled, with broken teeth still visible in the wound. Terrified, I took a step back, but because it was dark, my foot instinctively slipped, and I lost my balance on the cold steps. I slipped and took a hard fall on the stairs. My body hit the ground with a painful thud, making me dizzy and unable to react. My face slammed hard against the wall. There was instant, searing pain. My head spun, my vision blurred, my breath caught, and I unconsciously let out a loud scream of agony. My mother must have heard my scream. She ran down from upstairs, her face panicked, asking what on earth had happened. Seeing me sprawled on the steps, she frantically helped me up, repeatedly asking what was wrong, her voice trembling with worry. My tears flowed. I said I had just seen the dead Mr. Jack. There was no mistake. My mother didn't quite believe it, asking if I was seeing things, thinking I was scaring myself, and that's why I was so afraid. Looking at my face, she worriedly asked what happened to it. I said through my shudders that when I fell, I hit my face against the wall. Now it was burning and throbbing with pain. Back home, she checked for me. There were no scratches, just intense throbbing pain. She told me to take the next day off and see a doctor in case the bone was affected. That night I was in unbearable pain, tossing and turning restlessly. I barely closed my eyes all night, my heart filled with fear. The next day, my mother took me to the hospital, but after all sorts of tests, the results were normal, not even a single bruise. The left half of my face looked uninjured, but it throbbed with constant pain. Just touching it felt bone deep, as if someone was stabbing into a wound. My maternal grandmother heard the news and came to visit. She immediately mentioned Mr. Jack's death from downstairs. She was quite superstitious, so she felt my facial pain was related to Mr. Jack. My mother told her to stop overthinking things. She believed it was all just a coincidence, nothing to worry about or specifically related. But in the end, my grandmother convinced her. She said the day I claimed to have seen Mr. Jack on the stairs was his first 7th day after death, so there was definitely a connection. Since seeing the doctor yielded no results, my mother agreed to let my grandmother try her own method. My grandmother was very spiritual. Her method was simple. It only required a pair of chopsticks and a bowl of water. My mother went to the kitchen, got a bowl of water and a pair of chopsticks as requested, and brought them to her. My grandmother held the full bowl of water in her hands and gently set it on the table in front of my mother and me without a word. Then she gently stood the pair of chopsticks upright in the bowl of water. Ripples spread across the surface, and the room suddenly went silent. Then she questioned loudly, asking if he was old Mr. Jack from the floor below, her voice full of annoyance and suspicion. After asking, she let go, letting the chopsticks stand in the bowl of water before us to the astonishment of my mother and me. An unbelievable thing happened. Those chopsticks actually stood firm on their own in the water without falling over. Seeing that, both my mother and I were stunned, unable to believe our eyes. I began to feel that my grandmother was very special. Confirming her suspicion, she immediately began scolding him loudly, asking what our family had done to offend him that he would tease the girl like this. She further scolded that if he died unjustly, he should find the right person to demand justice from. If he dared to continue haunting the girl, she would call someone to deal with him. After she finished scolding, the chopsticks fell over, lightly hitting the bowl. It seemed everything had returned to normal. My mother didn't believe it at first, but by this point she was truly scared and confused. She clutched my grandmother's arm and asked what to do now. My grandmother just told me to go to my room and get some sleep. She had a way to handle it, and when I woke up, everything would be fine and there would be no more problems. I tried to endure the pain, went back to my room and lay on the bed. She tucked me in carefully and told me to just sleep. She would take care of everything. In a dazed state, my mind in a whirl, I drifted off to sleep and spent a restless night. When I woke up, I gently touched my face. I was overjoyed to find that my face no longer hurt. I asked my mother how Grandma did it. She said she didn't know either and told me not to ask too much, then urged me to go to school. Later, I asked my grandmother too, but she absolutely refused to tell me how she did it. After my face had completely healed, I noticed that Mr. Jack's daughter-in-law was pressing her hand against the left side of her face every day. She looked to be in great pain, which reminded me of how I had looked when my face was hurting. I just don't know if she was suffering for the same reason I was.